All right, so today we're going to take a deep dive into something pretty wild.
Hmm.
The Alex Jones and the whole InfoWars saga. From like his early days back in Austin to that crazy twist where the Onion ended up in charge. You sent over a ton of articles about this guy, like profiles and legal stuff, even pieces about what it all means for the media. I mean, where do we even begin with all this?
Well, one thing that really jumps out at me is how Jones was like a total pioneer when it came to online media, but not in a way anyone really saw coming. Back in the 90s, he was already kind of pushing the limits on public access TV, but then he was one of the first to really get the whole potential of the internet, like streaming and early social media.
It really is amazing when you think about it. He was way ahead of everyone in terms of building an audience online before going viral was even a thing.
Exactly. And the stuff he was putting out there, well, let's just say it was a bit out there. There's this book that seems to have had a huge impact on him early on. It's called None Dare Call It Conspiracy. And it's just full of these theories about like shadowy elites and a new world order controlling everything.
Ah, so that's
Yeah.
where those ideas came from. It makes you wonder, though. Did he really believe all this stuff, or was it more about attracting a specific audience?
Yeah.
People who would buy into these kinds of stories.
That's a question people have been debating for years. Some say he's a true believer, while others think it was all a cynical play for money. But one thing's for sure, he created this really specific brand of content. It was all about outrage. A mix of these conspiracy theories and political commentary, even product endorsements. And it really tapped into this deep vein of distrust and anxiety that was out there.
And some of the theories he pushed were, well, they were pretty wild, like 9/11 being an inside job or the government using chemicals to turn people gay, even that the Sandy Hook shooting was staged. It's a pretty crazy list.
And what's interesting is how he would often use like real information, often scientific research, but taken totally out of context, to build these elaborate narratives. He'd talk about things like water fluoridation or GMOs, which are legitimate topics for debate, but then he'd twist them into these grand conspiracies about the government controlling people and manipulating the population.
So he was playing on people's existing fears and concerns,
Hmm.
but like taking them to a whole other level. It's almost like he created this alternate reality where everything's connected, like everything's a sign, and you can't trust anyone in authority.
And that's a powerful message for people who are already feeling left out, like they don't belong in mainstream society. It creates this feeling of belonging, like you're in the know, you have access to this secret knowledge that the sheeple are clueless about.
And that's where the danger comes in, right? Because
Right.
it's one thing to believe in these crazy theories, but when those beliefs lead to real harm, that's when it crosses the line.
Exactly. And the Sandy Hook case is a perfect example of that. To claim that the shooting was staged, that the parents who were grieving were just crisis actors, that's beyond insensitive. It's deeply harmful.
It's just awful to think about the pain he caused those families, forcing them to relive that tragedy over and over again, all because he was pushing this narrative that fit into his worldview.
And that's ultimately what led to his downfall, those Sandy Hook lawsuits. The families fought back, and they were right to do so. And the courts, in a landmark decision, held him accountable for the harm he caused.
It's a major turning point in this whole story, the moment when things start to turn against him. Up until then, it seemed like he was untouchable. But the courts made it clear. You can't just go around spreading lies and misinformation without consequences, especially when those lies have real-world impacts.
It was a legal victory, but also a symbolic one. It showed that even in the wild west of the internet, there are limits. There are consequences for spreading harmful falsehoods.
And it wasn't just the courts, right? Social media platforms started taking action too. They banned him from Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, pretty much everywhere. That must have had a huge impact on his reach.
Absolutely. Deplatforming him from those big platforms was a real game changer. It cut him off from millions of followers, essentially silencing his megaphone. It's a complicated issue, though, because some people argue that censoring him just fueled this narrative of him being a silenced truth teller.
Yeah, it's a tough balance. On one hand, you don't want to give a platform to harmful speech, but on the other hand, you don't want to create this martyr complex where his supporters feel like their beliefs are being suppressed. But then, of course, Elon Musk brought him back to Twitter, or X, as it's called now.
Right. And that move really reignited the whole debate about free speech versus platform responsibility. Does allowing Jones back on, even with a smaller audience, legitimize his views? Or is it better to have those views out in the open where they can be challenged and debunked?
It's a tough question without an easy answer. But one thing's for sure. The Alex Jones saga is like a microcosm of the bigger challenges we face in the digital age, where information spreads like wildfire, truth and fiction get all mixed up, and it's harder than ever to tell fact from fabrication.
And what makes this whole story even weirder, even more surreal, is that The Onion, the kings of satire, ended up buying InfoWars. It's like something straight out of their own headlines.
Okay, now we're really getting into the thick of it.
Mm-hmm.
How did that even happen? And what does it mean for the future of InfoWars?
Well, that's a whole other story. And it really shows how unpredictable the media landscape is in the digital age. But before we get into the details of that acquisition, I think it's important to understand the role of white nationalism and coded language in Jones's rhetoric. While Jones might deny being a white nationalist himself, there's no denying that his platform gave a voice to those ideologies. He'd use coded language, dog whistles that would resonate with white supremacist groups, all while maintaining plausible deniability.
So you're saying there was this subtext to his message, this undercurrent of racial anxiety and resentment that appealed to a certain segment of the population.
Exactly. And it's not just about the language, it's about the narratives he was pushing. Take the birther conspiracy about Barack Obama, for example. It was deeply rooted in racist ideas. This notion that a black man couldn't possibly be a legitimate American president.
That's a really important point. It's not just about outlandish theories. It's about the dangerous ideologies that often get mixed in, the way those theories can be used to justify prejudice and discrimination.
And that's what makes the whole InfoWars phenomenon so disturbing. It wasn't just about entertainment, it was about shaping people's worldviews, their understanding of reality. And for some, that meant embracing these hateful ideologies.
It's chilling to think about the real-world impact of all this. You mentioned the Sandy Hook families, the harassment and threats they faced. But it goes beyond that, doesn't it? This kind of rhetoric can have a ripple effect contributing to a climate of fear and division.
Absolutely. When you constantly bombard people with messages about shadowy elites, about threats to their way of life, about the other being the enemy, it creates a fertile ground for extremism. It's no coincidence that many of the individuals involved in events like the January 6th insurrection were avid consumers of InfoWars content.
So it's not just about the individual lies and conspiracy theories. It's about the broader narrative that's being constructed, a narrative that can have real-world consequences.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that Jones was incredibly savvy about building a business model around all of this. It wasn't just about spreading his message, it was about monetizing it.
Right. It wasn't just about the message. It was about turning outrage into profit.
Exactly. He pioneered the strategy of blending conspiracy theories with product sales, dietary supplements, survival gear, water filtration systems. He tapped into people's anxieties about health and safety, convincing them that they needed to prepare for the coming collapse of society.
So he was profiting from the very fears he was stoking. It's a pretty cynical approach when you think about it.
And it was incredibly effective. He created this whole ecosystem where fear and outrage were turned into profit. And that's what makes the whole situation so complex. It's not just about debunking individual lies. It's about dismantling a whole system that was built on exploiting people's vulnerabilities.
It sounds like he really understood the power of the internet, not just as a platform for communication, but as a tool for persuasion and manipulation.
He was a master of using the tools of the digital age to his advantage. He understood how to use algorithms, how to create viral content, how to build an online community. And unfortunately, those same tools can be used to spread disinformation and harmful ideologies.
So how do we combat this? How do we prevent the next Alex Jones from emerging?
That's the million-dollar question. There's no easy answer. It's a multifaceted problem that requires a multifaceted solution. We need to educate people about media literacy, about critical thinking skills. We need to hold platforms accountable for the content they host. And we need to find ways to counter disinformation with accurate, evidence-based information.
It sounds like a daunting task. But the Alex Jones saga shows us why it's so important. We've seen firsthand the damage that can be done when misinformation spreads unchecked.
And let's not forget, this story is far from over. Even with the Sandy Hook lawsuits, the deplatforming, and the sale of InfoWars, Jones still has a following. He's still out there spreading his message.
And then there's the whole wild card of The Onion taking over InfoWars. That's a twist no one saw coming. What do you make of that move?
It's certainly an unconventional approach. It's almost like a performance art piece, a commentary on the state of media and the absurdity of the whole situation. But whether it will be effective in countering disinformation, that remains to be seen.
It does raise a lot of questions. Can you really change the DNA of a platform like InfoWars? Will the audience that was drawn to its conspiratorial content stick around for satire? Or will they simply migrate elsewhere, finding new echo chambers for their beliefs?
Those are all valid questions, and it'll be interesting to see how The Onion handles this challenge. Do they try to completely rebrand InfoWars? Do they use humor to debunk conspiracy theories? Or do they take a more meta approach using the platform to satirize the very nature of misinformation itself?
It's a high wire act for sure, but it's also a reminder that we need to think outside the box when it comes to combating disinformation. The old approaches may not be enough in this new landscape.
And speaking of unconventional approaches, the bankruptcy auction where the Onion acquired InfoWars had its own share of twists and turns. So the bankruptcy auction itself, it was pretty wild. Like a company linked to Alex Jones actually tried to stop the Onion from buying it. They claimed it was all some big scheme.
Wait, they're saying the Onion buying them was a conspiracy? That's almost too perfect.
It does sound like something straight out of the Onion, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Even the judge handling the bankruptcy case had doubts, like whether the auction was even legit.
Sounds like a whole legal meth on top of an already crazy situation.
And get this, Elon Musk's X-Corp got involved too. They filed some legal papers in the bankruptcy case, though nobody's really sure what they were up to.
Talk about adding another layer of weird to an already weird story. So in the end, did the Onion actually get InfoWars?
As far as anyone knows, yeah, the sale's going through. The Onion's been pretty quiet about what they're planning to do with it, though.
So we don't know if they're going full parody or something more subtle.
There have been some hints that they want to use it to advocate for things like gun violence prevention, which would be a big change from InfoWars' pro-gun stance.
It's kind of like poetic justice, you know? Turning a platform that was all about fear and division into one that promotes something good, but can they really pull it off? Can you really change the fundamental nature of a platform like that?
That's the big question, isn't it? Will the people who loved InfoWars for the conspiracy theories stick around for satire? Or will they just move on to find some other echo chamber?
And what about Alex Jones himself? He's bankrupt, deplatformed, but is he really silenced?
That's another piece of the puzzle. Even without InfoWars, he's still got his loyal fans. I wouldn't be surprised if he pops up somewhere else. Finding new ways to spread his message.
So this story's not over yet. The Alex Jones saga continues. Even if the InfoWars chapter is closing, it really makes you think about the power of belief, even when it goes against all the evidence.
Absolutely. This whole thing is a fascinating look at how misinformation spreads, how it takes hold, and how tough it is to fight back against. We've seen how social media amplifies these messages, the legal battles that show the consequences of spreading lies, and the challenges of trying to control content online.
And now there's this whole the Onion twist. It's like a social experiment. Can you use humor to fight disinformation? Can a platform completely change what it stands for?
And it raises bigger questions, too, about the future of media, the lines between information and entertainment getting blurry, and the need for all of us to be more careful about the information we consume.
It's a lot to think about. And I have a feeling this story will keep going in ways we can't even imagine. But for now, we'll leave you with this. If satire can take over the platform of conspiracy, what does that say about truth itself in this digital age? Something to think about as we navigate this constantly changing world of information. So walk me through this whole bankruptcy thing. Like, how did the Onion actually end up owning InfoWars? Was it just a matter of, like, putting in the highest bid or...
Oh, no. It was way more complicated than that. You see a company that had ties to Alex Jones himself. They actually tried to block the Onion's bid, saying it was all some kind of elaborate scheme.
Hold on. They're claiming a satirical news site buying them out as a conspiracy? That's incredible.
It really does sound like something the Onion would write about, doesn't it? Even the judge in charge of the whole bankruptcy case, he had his doubts about the whole thing, like if the auction was even on the up and up.
So it was a total legal circus on top of everything else.
And to make things even weirder, Elon Musk's X-Corp got involved. They filed some legal papers in the bankruptcy proceedings, but nobody really knows what their angle was.
Wow, it just keeps getting stranger and stranger. So did the Onion end up actually getting control of InfoWars in the end?
As far as we know, yeah, the sale's going through, though the Onion's been pretty tight-lipped about what they're going to do with it.
So we're not sure if they're going full-on parody or if they have something else in mind.
There's been talk that they might use the platform to advocate for things like gun violence prevention, which would be a pretty big shift from InfoWars' usual pro-gun stance.
It's almost like things have come full circle, turning a platform that was all about fear and division into something that promotes a positive cause. But is that even possible? Can you really change the very nature of a platform like that?
That's the big question, right? Will the people who loved InfoWars for all the conspiracy theories stick around for satire? Or will they just go find somewhere else that feeds their beliefs?
And what about Alex Jones? I mean, he's bankrupt and deplatformed, but is he really gone for good?
Well, that's the thing. Even without InfoWars, he still has a loyal following. I wouldn't be surprised to see him pop up on some other platform, finding new ways to get his message out there.
So it seems like this story isn't over just yet. The Alex Jones saga continues, even if the InfoWars chapter might be coming to a close.
It really is a fascinating story, and it makes you think about how misinformation spreads, how it takes root in people's minds, and how incredibly difficult it is to fight against.
We've seen firsthand the role social media plays in all of this, how it can amplify these messages. And we've seen the legal battles that have unfolded, highlighting the very real consequences of spreading lies and misinformation. And then, of course, there's the whole question of regulating content online, which is a challenge in itself.
And now with the Onion stepping in, it's like a whole new chapter is beginning.
It's almost like a giant social experiment,
Yeah.
Can humor be used as a weapon against disinformation? Can a platform completely transform its identity and its message?
It really raises some profound questions about the future of media, about the increasingly blurred lines between information and entertainment, and about the responsibility we all have as consumers of information to be more discerning and critical in what we choose to believe.
This has been a truly fascinating deep dive, and I have a feeling this story is far from over. It's going to be interesting to see how things unfold from here, but for now we'll leave you with this thought. If satire can take over the platform of conspiracy, what does that tell us about the nature of truth itself in this digital age? It's something to ponder as we navigate this ever-evolving world of information.